Okay, today we are considering the fate of the wicked, which may be why there's not as many of us here today. But I do want to welcome our YouTube audience that is continuing to grow. I think we're averaging about 190 some people a week viewing one of the videos we put out. I mean, I have several hundred, I think, posted, and many of them are being visited, so it's very encouraging, and we do welcome you and want you to feel like this is your church. So this came up, the question was raised, and that was you, Kenny Ruth. After the service last week, I talked about judgment, and so Kenny Ruth raised a very good question about the fate of people who cause great pain and suffering for others while on this earth. The name of Adolf Hitler comes to mind, though there are countless examples of such people on a greater and lesser scale. Shouldn't there be some kind of divine punishment for those who obviously do so much harm to others? And that is a good question, and it's one that is, I'm not going to say that I have an answer to, but I think it's worth asking ourselves. Ultimately, we all have to come to know ourselves or come to deal with this question ourselves. And if the other interesting thing is, if you don't like the system, whatever it is, where are you going to complain? Where are you going to file your complaint? There doesn't really seem to be a place to do that. But I think we all share similar feelings about people that do horrible things to other people. So I'm going to share some ideas today that are a little bit different from what we're used to hearing or how we normally think. And I'm not going to suggest that we should start thinking that way, just that there are other ways of looking at this whole question. And I think, one way to approach any question we have like this is to look at multiple sides of it, to see what the thinking is on all sides. We tend not to do that, but I think most of us would agree that in a just universe there should be divine retribution for those who intentionally inflict pain and suffering on others. I had the privilege of doing jury duty a couple of years ago. I've been called many times to do it and never had to serve, but I was called in this time. And when they go through the juror selection, the attorneys get up and ask potential jurors questions. And one of them said, "You are a minister." And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Would you have any trouble convicting someone if we found them guilty?" And I said, "No, because I understand the human side of humanity. When you are in ministry, you see, probably like law enforcement, you see the best and worst in the human race. And mostly it's the best, or the aspiring to be the best. But occasionally you see some situations where people are, they look like they're not doing society much of a service. And so my eyes are not closed to that, and so I said, yes, I could do that, and we actually ended up convicting the person, or finding them guilty, I guess is the word. But it was a very, very cut and dried case, and I just was left wondering, because it was so evident, so obvious, what the situation was, that why would we waste taxpayer money and time to even consider something like this? But that's our justice system. And if I was on that end, I would want the same treatment. So we have to look at it that way. But that's how judgmental I am. But that's, we recognize human nature is quite different from what we would consider divine behavior. And we're here on this planet. We all have bodies, and there's some very strange things going on. But here's an interesting perspective. And yet, with the exception of relatively few cases, the majority of the majority who momentarily die and return report that there is no punishment of any kind, even when they've lived a less than moral life. They say that a life review, which can be excruciating, is the extent of their punishment. Yet they feel no judgment from the being of light or other entity that brought them to the review. What a lot of them will say is they're going through this experience, they pass through this tunnel, and then they encounter a being of light, or they encounter angelic beings, or maybe relatives that have passed on. And that being of light, or those beings of light, will usher them to a place where they begin to have a life review. And this photo is, or this picture illustrates that. Many say it will look like there's a multitude of screens, and it's different aspects of their life all through their lives, from childhood to the present. And some of the scenes that they see, they say, are very difficult. They feel like they could have done much better there. And I think any of us, just thinking of our life, and I think that's probably a good exercise to conduct our own life review once in a while and look back and what would I have done better? And of course, we forget a lot of the things that we've done in life. We forget a lot of the exchanges. Sometimes we may have said something that hurt someone and we didn't even know it. And we may not know it until we have a life review. And these people say they remember even those kinds of things. And I have no explanation for that. Nobody does. According to our physics and our brain understanding and all of that, there's no logical explanation as to how somebody can, in a matter of seconds, in fractions of seconds, recall every detail of their life. And yet it is such a common reporting, even from people that don't know anything about this research at all. When I first started ministry, I was Beth and I were in Bay City, Michigan. And I was in the office one day, and a man came in. He was probably in his late 70s, early 80s, and I didn't know him, and he didn't know me. He just dropped in, and I don't know why he did this, but he said, "Could I tell you something?" And I said, "Yeah." He had a near-death experience when he was 17 years old, and he drowned and had this incredible, beautiful experience, and he had full recollection of his 17 years of living. And he was trying to explain this to me, and you could tell he was not making it up. He was just as serious as he could be. But why he would share it with a complete stranger, I don't know. We just were drawn together for whatever reason. But he had absolutely no reason, to sit there and make up a story like that. But I said, and I had been exposed to Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, which I think came out in the 80s or late 70s. I don't remember when, but I had read that. But I was not real interested in the whole subject. But I asked him, I said, "Have you ever heard of any of this? Do you know what a near-death experience is?" And he had no idea. Never heard of it before. But what he described to me, a complete stranger, was a classical near-death experience. And so I believe the people that have these things are telling the truth. And what they say almost to the person is there's no judgment like we normally think of it from a religious perspective. And that even people that, now there are stories that people will claim they'll see a bunch of people off in the distance and they're all suffering and crying and weeping and wailing and all that. But what a lot of researchers say is the type of experience you have can depend on your whole background. If you totally embrace that kind of thing, you may project that into the actual experience. But what's interesting is that some people who have totally embraced that, are born-again Christians, will have a near-death experience and will say, "Wow, that was nothing like I thought." And this being of light, and many of them think of that as God. nothing at all like I was expecting or would have expected. So you've got both sides, and then you have a total atheist that believes none of this stuff, that has this incredible experience, comes back believing, but not in the traditional way. They understand that we are spiritual beings, much more than we realize, much greater than we realize, much more to us than we realize. And they come back changed. And this is one thing a psychologist that is in, Bruce Grayson, is in, or psychiatrist, I think he is, does this research. He's a leading researcher. He says, as a psychiatrist, we work to get people to change negative behaviors, and that can last years of therapy. And he says what's incredible about this near-death thing is they change in the matter of seconds. Their whole life changes in the matter of seconds. And that, to a person like him, is baffling. So you have to say there's something going on here. These people are having some kind of an experience, but they're saying, most of them are saying there is no judgment, like we normally think of it. That the worst thing that happens is that they go through this review that's very painful. But as it's been pointed out, Pam brought this up the other day, that these people have had near-death experience, not full death experiences. So we don't really know what happens beyond that. And that's true. All we have to go on is what they tell us, the people that have stepped through the veil for a time and have come back. But the exception to that is those who research the stories of children who claim to have past life memories. So that would represent, and these are very credible. If you go online, look up Jim Tucker. He's the leading researcher from the University of Virginia. He's a leading researcher in this field, probably the best in the world. And listen to his stories. Listen to the stories that these children have told him, and that they have verified, the facts they verified. So here's a kid that has died, and as an adult probably. One was a fighter pilot in World War II, one of the best stories. Comes back as a little kid and has an obsession with airplanes and crashing the airplanes into a table. And he was shot down. And he named the aircraft carrier he was on. He named the airplane, the kind that he flew. And he named the people that were with him. And it was soon enough to where they had a reunion. And they took this little boy to the reunion, and he pointed out the people that he knew when he was a fighter pilot. And it's he has many stories like this that when you hear them, how do you explain that? But there's no judgment in this sense. The judgment is he is sort of strapped with the memory. He tried to bail out of the airplane, apparently, and it wouldn't open. The chute, or the cockpit would not open. It was on fire. And it crashed. And the people at the reunion, as they pointed this story out, they all remembered that. They remembered when that happened. So it's very fascinating stuff, but this Jim Tucker follows up when he gets a story, and I actually talked to him, or I emailed him about the little boy I had that came in several years ago, and shared that story with him. But by the time I shared it with him, the kid was probably in his 20s or so. But when I met him, he was, I think he was 3 or 4 years old, claimed to be his grandfather, and was in love with a little redheaded girl that he said was his wife, and he gave her a kiss and got in trouble at school. He'd never seen a picture of his grandmother, but she indeed had red hair. Never seen a color picture of her. So he described all that. And the parents were Baptists, did not believe in reincarnation, did not know what to do with this kid. So they came in and talked to me. I think it was his aunt that recommended they come in and talk with me about it. But anyway, I don't have any doubts that this kind of thing happens. I have no doubts that the near-death experiences are credible. Some of them are probably overblown. I think people try to outdo each other sometimes with their stories. You know, it used to be that if somebody had an experience like this and they wrote about it, it'd be the only book on the shelf, and it would fly off the shelf. You know, everybody was so fascinated by it. But now it's like it happened. You know, there's new 2 or 3 books every week, you know, on this subject. So there's more competition, and I'm not discrediting them for saying that. I'm just saying that the fuller that field becomes, the more that book is going to have to stand out somehow. And how's that going to be? We're going to have to hire an editor that shows us how to do that, and you know, that kind of thing. It's called marketing. So I recall a case where a person was murdered by a gang but recovered later to tell of their incredible near-death experience. This person said they thanked their attackers for giving them this opportunity. And that's incredible to me. That's just, I couldn't believe what I was reading. While such an attitude is nearly impossible for most of us to fathom, it is a common response in such cases. The experience the person has is so far beyond our average human perceptions that we struggle to reconcile such reports. The cardiologist Pim van Lommel, another one I would recommend that you look up. He is one of the forefront researchers also in near-death experience, but his introduction to it was he was doing heart surgery, was losing his patient, in fact had lost his patient, but managed to resuscitate them. And he and his team were very excited by this, very happy that they saved this person's life. And he was completely shocked when the person opened their eyes and said, "Why did you bring me back? I was having such a good time, having such an incredible experience." They were angry, very angry that they had been brought back. So that's very unlike what we think of when we think of death. You know, we all avoid it, and I think we should. I mean, it's not something you want to do every day. You know, it's just there's a natural tendency to stay alive, to stay in this body. And everything that is alive shares that. It's a survival instinct. So when we hear something like this, "I left my body, why did you bring me back?" We have to assume that they had some kind of an experience that was very meaningful to them, that was very profound, that they saw something much bigger. And so often they will say, "I can't go back into that little tiny body, that little place, because I'm too big." They don't know sometimes how they get back in. But they get back in and they feel like they're wearing a wetsuit that's 4 times too small. And that's, I mean, the things they describe are not normal things you would hear someone say. But it's very common, you know, from this, how do I get back in that little thing? First of all, there's no way I'm going to go back. Somebody says, "It's not your time. You've got to go back." And most of them resist it. But it's a completely different perspective. And so this person is murdered, temporarily dies from this gang, and you would think, you know, gangs are horrible. But this person actually had the attitude of, and it wasn't a religious type of forgiveness, like we would normally think. I've got to love everybody, you know, kind of, I've got to love my enemy. It was like the person said, basically the experience was so large that I could not think of even those people as something bad. So that's the perspective that most of us struggle with. We have not had that broad of a vision. We may be broad thinkers, but to actually step into that limitless experience that the soul apparently goes into at this time, it's hard to describe, hard to fathom. In fact, we can't fathom it. So our thinking is based on the body and all the parameters of the body and the justice system and, law and order and all of that. And I myself embrace that, because in these bodies, we have issues, we have problems, we have people that are not well, that will do harm to others, and maybe in the ultimate sense, the others don't mind leaving this planet because of the incredible experience they have, but from this perspective, we don't know that. And see, the danger of talking like this is somebody that's a little bit off says, well, that means I can go out and kill. I can go out and do whatever I want. And that's not what it is intended to mean at all. This message is for a healthy audience. And I assume most of you are pretty healthy. I assume all of you are healthy. I wouldn't be here. And you're getting healthier. So what's the mainstream Christian answer to this? And I would encourage you to look this up. If a Christian is a murderer and repents, will that person be accepted into heaven? Okay, we're moving from talking to people with experience to talking to people with beliefs. And what is the answer? The answer is yes. If the person truly surrenders to Jesus Christ and believes fully in Him as both Lord and Savior, that's the mainstream Christian answer. So it's the same thing, but it's conditional. You've got to accept Jesus Christ as your personal Savior and as your Lord and Savior. So how many times have we seen people that get in trouble and find Jesus in order to get out of trouble? I used to go to a medical center when I was in Springfield, Missouri, and I think I've told you this, but talk to people in going through a 30-day in-house rehab treatment program, and many of them were there because the judge said, you either go there or you go to jail. And so they become very repentant, when they're there. And but one guy was pretty honest. He said, well, I'm sober enough now to actually be able to hit the guy. I couldn't shoot straight when I was drunk. So he had the intention of going back and finishing what he was there for in the first place, which is kind of sad. So it's like people find Jesus, in these low moments, and then it passes when those low moments are gone. So we're not talking about the same thing at all. We're talking about, this is a belief system, and I've been aware of this, but if you just do a search again, what happens to the Christian that is a murderer, that is, not doing so well? And the answer is, as long as they accept Jesus, they'll be okay. And so that's kind of the general thinking. There's all kinds of things that go through my mind, as I'm thinking about these things. And some of the experiences I've encountered some very bad people. One sat across my desk, on the other side of my desk, murdered one of my colleagues 20 years after that. And so I've been in the presence of some pretty unseemly characters, and I understand human nature. But we're not talking about human nature. On the human level, there should be law and order. And on the spiritual level, it's a different landscape, a completely different landscape. But we are in the body, so we don't want to ignore that. That's not what I'm advocating at all. But Paul said, for now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall understand fully, even as I have been fully understood. And I think that's true. In this body, we see through a glass darkly. We're not seeing the whole picture. And as I have said before, that's probably a good thing, because I think if we were always seeing the whole picture, it would be quite difficult for us to function in day-to-day life. because we wouldn't care about a lot of things, that happen in our life. We wouldn't have much personal interest in anything because we wouldn't have relationships like we think of them because we would love everyone. That's the thing. Jesus was asked, what happens if somebody's married, they die, and whatever, I don't know. But he said they're neither, in the resurrection, they neither marry or are taken in marriage, given in marriage. And I think what that is a soul free of the body has no need. It feels no lack of any kind, feels no need to pair up with somebody, but pairs up with all souls. And it's like there's no separation anymore. But here we are separate. We experience separation. So we're more than we know. The soul's natural condition is so far beyond our normal human thinking that only a direct experience can show us the vastness of this reality we inhabit. So we may have glimpses into it, and that's kind of what the near-death experience is. I hope none of you have to go through that particularly, but times of quiet or so forth, you can have insights into a life that's much larger than the one you normally think about. And it's sort of like if you go on vacation and you let go of everything, you feel a whole different sense of freedom, and you think of your life in a different way. That's the whole point of it, is to become refreshed by getting away from the routine, coming back and living it with a new sense of inspiration. With a body, we purchase real estate, build fences, and make clear legal distinctions between what is mine and thine. Outside the body, none of this is needed. The thinking we use to gain leverage in this world is not necessary to the soul who experiences its own completeness. The soul does not seek to gain from another that which it already possesses. That's why, as free of the body, we would not probably seek out individual relationships because we're already complete, and we know that completeness. So, and it's not necessarily that we're trying to find the rest of ourselves, although that's what a lot of human thinking is. My better half or my other half, as if I'm half and they're half, and we put us both together, we're whole. Well, the soul is whole already. And so it's not probably busy trying to find its other half. It already knows what it is. It's a whole different way of thinking. And so we wouldn't seek out personal relationships. We would see the bigger picture. We would see the biggest picture for all and of all. And we would not be trying to get from somebody something we feel we lack. And that is a lot of what relationships are based on, or what I should say a good number of relationships are based on. I don't feel whole, so I need to find the rest of myself in another person. And that usually ends up in a real challenge. But, again, that's something we all have to weigh and wade through to understand. So this question is one that we all must take into our own heart. I too see the world through a glass darkly, but I strive to come face to face with the true nature of reality. I cannot help but think that it looks much different face to face than it does through the darkened glass through which I so often see. So I don't think I have presented any answers, any way to think necessarily, but maybe stirred up some thought, stirred up some questions. What my leaning is, okay, we're in a body and we have this world to deal with. And we all try to love our neighbor. We try to be the very best people we can. But what we are trying to be, we will never be. We will never achieve that as long as we are functioning without a full awareness of what we are at the soul level. So that raises a whole other set of questions. Why would we choose to step into a body when it shuts down so much of our being? And that's a question I still wrestle with. And the answer I've come up with is we wanted to do this for some reason. I'm trying to remember what that was. But it's, to me, that's the only answer there is. I don't know what that means. But I believe it's all about choice. I don't think we're forced into anything. And so that's kind of where I come from, and it's an open-ended question. It's not an answer necessarily. But do I believe people that say, I forgive my murderers? If somebody says that to me, I tend to believe them because that's a pretty big statement. And not just anyone would say it unless they've had some kind of an experience that actually allows them to do that. So it's something to think about. All right? Thanks for coming out. Thank you for watching this week's program. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with others. We want to reach as many people as we can, and we appreciate your help. If you'd like to help support this ministry, just click the donate card at the top right-hand corner of your screen. Your financial support means a lot to us. We have many subjects in our video lineup, so feel free to take a look. If there's a topic you don't see and would like me to address, just put it in the comment section. I'd love to know what's on your mind. To subscribe to this channel, simply click our logo. Thanks again for your interest in independent unity, and have a wonderful week.